He can talk about the history of WSFA 12 News because he's such a big part of it. James Belton served in almost every department of the station before he retired. Now he calls himself an average viewer, but it won't take you long to realize this man is anything but average. His rhythm still matches the heartbeat of this station, and today he's digging up the past with some excitement about WSFA's future. I'm Bethany Davis, and this is Being Real.
Sponsored by Bryan Jewelry.
When you call me, I'll answer. And if you need someone to hold your hand, when you're lonely, I'll be there. I will give you everything I am.
Promise your everything with a diamond from Bryan Jewelry.
I know you've been here.
I've been here once before. And, I was a little jealous because I have a building that didn't look like this when I worked here, but hey, we didn't have as many steps to climb.
Well, that's very true. We do have some elevators, though.
Yeah,
that helps. That helps. But
that's right.
really, I mean, you spent a lot of years working in our old building. I know jealous is kind of I know you're joking when you use that term, but what do you think when you walk through? I mean, this is a pretty fancy place, especially compared to where we came from.
Especially, because I guess the thing is we heard about we're going to move. We're looking at perhaps a new building and all of that kind of thing, but it was always the dream that we couldn't get to at the time. And, we made a big deal when they changed the address from 10 Delano to 12 Delano. Somebody said, well, how did you get the address? Well, it took about 20 of us to move the building down 2 spaces, sort of things that we used to talk about. But it's a great difference. But the additional space, and I guess I'm just looking at the new technology that's just flooring me because, I was back in the day when we edited off a 2-inch tape. And you prayed a lot because you wasn't sure the edit was going to go through. I mean, that was torture. But it was good, and we had fun even doing that, so it was great.
Well, take us back then. Take us back a little bit to that time. What year did you start working here?
I started April '74.
74. Okay, so take us back to WSFA in April of 1974. Who did you work with, and what was the culture like?
The culture at WSFA had always been a family type of atmosphere, and that was the whole thing that really made me want to come because also, if I were to put it in sports term, it was like once you got to WSFA, you were playing in the Super Bowl. All the other stations were doing what other stations do, but your goal was to get to WSFA because they were the ones that set the standards for broadcasting in this area. When I think about the time in production when I could show up at work and it could be Governor Wallace, it could be a senator, it could be 5 or 6 reporters from NBC, CBS, all over, depending on what the story would be like in Montgomery, they would all come to WSFA because back in the days we had some of the best photographers, we had a film processing area, so they would all come here to get the video and stuff to feed back to New York. So it was one of those times when everything was kind of moving, but the whole atmosphere of the people that worked in the station was what made you feel a part of all of it, because you could tell the security guy for Governor Wallace, I work here. Well, come on in. I'm here, but you work here, so you must be okay. And but we had all of the tools that we needed to get the job done, and everybody here was family. When I first started, actually before I started, Carl Stevens, who was program director at the time, and Chief Payne was engineer. And I started working part-time between production and engineering. And I would work 20 hours a week in production, 20 hours in engineering, 4 10-hour days. So I worked weekends in production at the station, and I worked Thursday, Friday at the transmitter. So nobody really knew me except the engineers and some of the switchers. And I remember the first Christmas party that I went to, everybody was saying, who are you again? And I have to reintroduce myself because nobody knew me. And one of my friends walked up to me at the time, they really didn't know me, and she says, what does your wife do at the station? And, you know, being like I am, the first thing I said, well, she comes by on Tuesdays and pick up my check. So, you know, but it was family all the way, and that story is that before I even started working here, they took me through the station, introduced me to everybody as to a possible candidate to come to work here. It was almost like, if they approve you, we can offer you the job. But if you don't look like you fit into the family, then we might not offer you the job. And I thought that was the coolest thing that had happened, because all the other jobs I've been in, that's your cubicle, you expected to be here at 8 and stay to 5 in the sense of the word.
Yeah.
But that was one of the things that I liked most about it. And everybody did a thing where you were welcome if they saw you in the hall. You know, hey, welcome, when are you going to start? And that sort of thing. When are you working? But it was always that family atmosphere that drew us all together. And I think probably as far as close-knit, you never could have found a better crew, whether it was the technical department, production, or sales even. You know, everybody worked together toward that common goal. And I think that was one of the things that the people in the community knew about WSFA.
I think that's one of the things too that makes WSFA so special. It's one of those, like, you can't really touch it, you can't really feel it, you can't really see it, but
Right.
you know it's there. And I think if you watch Channel 12, you see it.
You could see it.
And I love that it's always been that way.
Exactly. And I think that was one of the things too, is that WSFA meant so much to everybody, and it was almost like you knew that if WSFA said this is okay, especially in those days with the nonprofits, when everybody was trying to get a public service announcement on something to let them know what they were having. If they were able to get a public service announcement on WSFA, it was like, okay, they got to be good. Let me go donate some money or help them out, because they wouldn't be on WSFA if they were not doing something good. And I thought that was real good, because everybody sort of looked up, and I think probably with the managers that we had back in those days, they knew where the bar was in terms of WSFA setting the bar and having to live up to the expectations of the community. And the community respected WSFA because of what they were doing for the community.
All right, I want to talk a little bit about you for a little while.
Okay.
You said you started in production. Explain exactly what you were doing. What does that mean when you were starting in production? What kind of job did you do?
I have a title, was switcher director. All the commercials that went on the air, we were putting them on in between. When you had syndicated program, when the little 2 minutes would come up, we filled that with a commercial. We had X number of seconds to run commercials to get back to the network on time. And our goal at that time was to make sure there was no black between the commercials and the program. So you had to be on time with everything. But as far as that go, we also helped produce a lot of the commercials that were being done, because WSFA really at that time had an in-house agency almost, if you look at it, because we had a creative services director that could write copy. We had photographer that would go out and shoot the commercials. And then as switchers, we edited a lot of them. And so it was a little circle there. And the fun, like I say, the fun part of it was making all that work. And those 2-inch tape machines, they could be challenging when you start to edit, you know. When somebody says, I need 3 seconds of this shot, and I want to go to this one, and you say, okay, I got to do a 5-second this. But long story short, it was a lot of fun. And as far as doing the editing and what I was doing at that time, it was good for me, because I had done that when I was at Alabama State, because I worked in the media center. And what I'm doing now is like a refresher course as far as editing and making sure all of that worked.
So how long did you do that job?
I did that for, I guess maybe 74. I think I moved from the switching part of it to directing in maybe 75, a little bit later. And that's when we would start to, you moved up a step from putting the commercials on the air. All of a sudden, you were one that would go out and help produce the spots. And you would be over the editing as long as, with the creative services director. And from there, I did that from like 75 for maybe, I'm gonna say maybe 8, 10 years maybe.
Oh, that's a good long time.
Yeah, and but during the time, it was a good thing because in addition to producing and directing those commercials, we also directed news shows. Like I was there when we started Today in Alabama. I was there when we started. Well, I've been there forever, so no need of worrying about that part of it. But you know, the thing is that we moved up in the way we were doing and the responsibilities that we had. And producing a news show, they have, as you all do now with producers in the newsroom, our job was to make sure that we stayed within the time limit of those 30 minutes for the entire show, maybe 3.5 minutes for weather, 5 minutes for sports, and that sort. And we did the back timing of the show and made sure all the other technical parts of it was going like they should have been. And,
which actually requires you to be really smart and do a lot of math. When you're back timing a show, that means you got to know,
yeah.
you got to work backwards
with
the time.
With the time, exactly right. And there were those times when it helped to be good in math because there were times when we would be doing a show, and if something broke and we were going to cut into something live, now we got to sit here and watch a clock as to, okay, we were trying to do this in a minute, it took a minute and a half. What do we have that's about 25, 35 seconds that we can cut? Or are we going to take this away from sports? Or will it come out of weather? You know, how will we do it? Do we have a PSA we can run? But, you know,
Right.
it's whatever we had to do to make sure we kept that show on time. That's what we did.
Which is a little bit tricky. You didn't have computers at that in 1974, 5,
No,
even
we-
1980 or 85 to do that for you.
We barely had calculators, so imagine. So imagine how that was going, you know. But when I look back on it, it was a lot. It was a lot of fun. Now I can laugh about it. But there were those days that I was sort of losing a little hair at the time, you know. And but
It's a lot of pressure.
it is a lot of pressure, and when you have your anchors, that they have their script, they know what's timed out, and they have the choice of dropping stories too if we run long on something. So, all in all, when they're finished, if you were not in the studio and knew the chaos, oh, it's a great news show. Man, I don't know how they did that. And we said that sometime too. How did we do that?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, do you have any moments that you can look back on and think, number one, either I just don't know how that actually we pulled that off, or two, we really didn't pull that off. We kind of bombed that one.
I guess, yeah, I have a story that was probably the one that caused me the most anxiety. If we used to produce a 30-minute show for Jubilee every year, and it would run right after the 6 o'clock report on Saturdays, and we would do live from downtown. And that Saturday, I was directing on location, and I think Arlen was back in the studio, and we set the shot up. Everything is looking good, and one of our engineers was saying, "I don't like the way that looked. I'm gonna let me put these color bars back up, and we're gonna tweak this a little bit." And he did, and we did, and about, I think Arlen said, "Belt, you got 30 seconds, and we'll be coming to you." I said, "Okay, no problem." And we had done like a 15-second tease saying, "We're down here, the crowd's picking up," all that sort of deal. And about 15 seconds before he was coming to me, signal dropped. Went black, totally. And I heard Arlen. Now, Arlen, you would have to have known him to know, he didn't get upset over nothing. You know, the chair that he was sitting in could be burning. And he would say, could somebody put a little water on this side? You know, that's how cool he was. And I heard Arlen's voice go up. He said, Belt, 15 seconds. Arlen, I'm trying. You know, Belt, 10 seconds. I said, okay, here's it. And by this time, I'm yelling at the engineer, how much longer? How much longer? And he said, I'll have it. And Arlen says 5, 4, 3, and when he hit 1, the signal came up and he put it right on the air.
Like it was just
Exactly part of the
way
routine.
It planned.
Yeah, you know. And I said, no, I don't want to go through this no more. But those were some of the times that we can laugh about. And one of the other things we were doing as we were identifying ourselves with WSFA, we used to do shows on the 4th of July for Maxwell. And our WSFA stood for We Stand for America. Oh. So we would be out there, and there was one night, it was on the 3rd of July, and we were in the remote van, and we let the tower up, you know, so we could get the signal back. And one of the worst thunderstorms I think Montgomery had ever had was coming through, you know, and we were trying to get the staff down so we didn't all get fried in the truck. And by the time we were about ready to go on the air with that, it kind of passed on out. I said, oh, wow, you know, the gods are watching.
But when you call me, I'll answer. And if you need someone to hold your hand, and when you're lonely, I'll be there. I will give you everything I have.
Promise your everything with a diamond from Bryan Jewelry.
Let's talk about working with people like Norman Lumpkin or Arlen Carr, people that they were your coworkers, obviously.
Right.
But man, they were pioneers
Exactly.
in this particular industry. Were you aware of that at the time? Did you understand what was happening as they were making history themselves?
We never. I never thought about it like that, and I don't think they did either. You know, because Arlen and I, you know, we were good friends. Well, we're all good friends, but we never looked at it from the standpoint that these are history makers now that everybody else will recognize later. To us, you know, hey, we're going to, where we're doing lunch at, I don't know, let's just get some hamburgers somewhere. And that was the spirit of where we were at the time. And it started to hit a little bit later with Norman because he became a sort of the standard for investigative reporting. And his contact list would have to be 10 miles long because Norman could pick up the phone and call anybody at whatever time he felt like. Now, you know, his sidekick was Victor Irving, you know, and Norman would call Vic, say, hey, I got a tip, get your camera. And they were off to the races, so to speak. It might be 2 weeks later before the story hit the air, but they had all of it put together. That had been run by attorneys to make sure nothing was wrong. But those were things that they did. We had a news director back at the time, Charles Caton. I give him credit for being open-minded enough to know exactly what we needed to do. And he was one of those guys that as long as you're doing everything legal and making sure that we're not going to get sued over something, I'm right here with you. And that was the thing with Norman and Vic. And with Charles, you know, he was the type that we want the story, we want the facts. But, you know, I think we had a slogan at one time, first, fast, and factual. for the newsroom. And that's what they live by, and but as far as the history part of it, I never thought about it. Arlen and I used to, go to each other's house. We have dinner. I'd go to his mom's house. She was like my mom away from home, And even during those days, I got to meet people that were history makers even at the time because of Mrs. Carr. And Arlen and I, as Vicki would tell me sometimes, well, no, it's just Daddy. He's nobody special. But, and that's the thing that I didn't think about at the time. And I think about between Norman and Arlen, Vic, there were some other people that were, I thought, real big trendsetters as far as that go at the station, because they lived what we talked about, and that's family. They loved each other, and as a group of employees working together, it couldn't get any better.
Yeah.
And that, as they say, it went across my trifecta from engineering to production to sales, all the way across.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You talked a little bit earlier about some of the babies that you've kind of watched grow up. I think I probably am one of those. I remember meeting you on my first day at work, by the way, and you were one of those people who welcomed me in, who stopped me in the hallway and said, "We're so glad you're here." And the spirit of Channel 12. That was 25 years ago, by the way. So here I am. But don't you feel like you had such a hand in raising a lot of us?
Well, I didn't look at it like that. I felt like my position is to make sure that as we had new employees coming in, was to make sure that they did feel welcome, that they didn't have to try to figure it out on their own. They had people that they could go ask, hey, what do I need to do about this? I need a B-roll. Do I need to go to you, or when I go over here? But our job was, in the sense of the word, the way I looked at it, was to try to be a mentor to as many as I could, and it worked out, I think, for me and for some of the others, because I do get, I'm going to say compliments from some of them. Say, it's a good thing you were there, because I don't know if I would have made. Yes, you would have made it, but it's just it was a thing that we all care for each other, and if you're going to be here with us, we had to fit in and do what we need to do.
Yeah.
So.
I like what you said about you do have to be able to form that chemistry. We do. A lot of us really enjoy each other, even outside of work. We really enjoy each other's company. And
exactly.
I've said before about some of our coworkers, we love working together, but really we just love each other.
Exactly, and I think that was the other thing, because we talk about inside the building, we talk about our jobs and how well we did them or didn't do them, and how we got help when we didn't expect it. But the other thing that we talk about a lot too is that because of just because of the family type atmosphere with WSFA, other companies that I'd worked for talking about a company picnic, no. And every year WSFA would have a picnic where you brought your family. I got to meet Mrs. So-and-so, I got to meet the children, and we all had fun. And the one thing that we don't talk about a lot is that outside of the station. It was one thing, because we always used to talk about commuting into WSFA and leaving and going home. We didn't talk about a lot of times when we were doing election coverage, for an example, when we had those, long before computers, when we had to put up all the good looking stuff with those little blocks and wires running everywhere to change the numbers, and by the time we got the results in, it's 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. Well, as a team, you're tired. As employees and folk that work together, we would always leave. There was a restaurant here, I think it was called Crockmeyer's. That was where we would all go have breakfast after an election. And unfortunately, I was that director that had to go in and do the morning show.
Ooh.
And so it was one of those things that if I go to breakfast with the crew, I might not make Today in Alabama updates in the morning. So the deal was I would go with the crew, I would have breakfast, and then I would go back to the station and be prepared for the cut-ins the next morning.
Probably better safe to just not go back
That-
home. And
Because
go
if
to
I
bed.
went home, it was over. So, and we used to do that. That was a lot of fun. And we could talk about that forever, And there were other people that were here. I hadn't said anything about Phil Snow and Bob Howell and Dan Atkinson and that news crew that really put us out front in terms of standards and where we were. Now, we've always had good anchors, going all the way back to Frank McGee and all of that, but when we start to look at where the modern day guys started to come in at, that is where we start to look at and go back and look at Bob and Phil and Dan. We had another guy that used to work here that was doing the weather, Ralph Williams. He did it with the old shoe polish thing and a wheel that you turned around and you marked all the fronts on while you were doing the weather.
Wow.
And so when I think about all of that, I think about, man, did I really come through all of this? And I think the funniest thing that ever happened was that when Saturday Night Live, when it first came on air, we didn't take Saturday Night Live live. We would run Star Trek, and then we would end up going to Saturday Night Live afterwards because, our status in the community and being in the Bible Belt, Saturday Night Live was just a little bit too up for us. Even at that time on a Saturday night, But it all worked to the point where coming out of some of those, going into Saturday Night Live, it was just a thing where, again, standards. What are we going to do? How much controversy is this going to cost? And we would go through it and look at things like that. And it was just funny the way we did things, but I think when I was talking about managers understanding, I think that whole thing came down to we have to understand the community that we serve and how are we going to serve them where they have the confidence in us to do the right thing.
When you think about Channel 12, your time here, and as you watch it, now that you're not a day in, day out employee, are there any specific words that come to your mind?
Remembering, as far as my time here, yeah, I would say the words that come most of all was that family, love, and the willingness to make sure everybody was on the same page to produce what would be a good quality end product. And it didn't matter where it started. If the product that went off on these airways, it was going to be the best thing that could be offered at the time. And that was from traffic to production to sales to news, the whole works. Because it was a joint effort.
Interesting, because I think a lot of those words could be used to describe you. So thank you. We love to talk about the family we become when we work here at WSFA. James Belton will always be a father figure in this family, a man we can't help but love and admire and respect what makes him real.